Hello and welcome. My name is Itzel Hayward, also known as Kamala in my yoga community, which is a Sanskrit name that was given to me by my integral yoga teachers after I completed my first 200-hour yoga teacher training. I'm currently speaking from what is colonially known as Oakland, California, which sits on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Lisjan Ohlone, the original peoples of this land. And I'm so grateful for your presence here today as I share some thoughts on a spiritual perspective to responding to racism. And I'm grateful to the Give Back Yoga University and the Give Back University community. Give Back Yoga University is a virtual campus for yoga professionals, healthcare workers, and academic researchers to share knowledge and exchange ideas. So I'm grateful to them for this opportunity. So I'm often asked by folks to speak to predominantly white communities and non-BIPOC communities and answer a question that many of them have been asking themselves, particularly over these last 12 months, which is how can I, as a non-BIPOC person, a non-white person, respond to racism in a spiritual way? And I'm here to answer that question today. So now, before we move into how to respond to racism from a spiritual perspective, I want to start by talking about what I mean by spirituality. And then I want to talk about what racism is. And then I'll conclude with what a spiritual response to racism can look like. So I speak with a lot of people who ask me about what spirituality is. And a lot of the people who come to me have this idea that being spiritual is about being peaceful. But that idea of spirituality turns spirituality into something that it's not. It turns spirituality into wanting to get from exactly where you are to some other place, to where you want to be, to where you think you should be. So then it becomes resisting, right? This present moment experience, and instead trying to match some image or notion that the mind has created called peace or serenity or enlightenment. But as we talk today, I want you to think about spirituality as turning toward whatever is happening now, turning toward whatever is happening now, whatever's happening in the body, in your experience, without trying to get rid of it or fix it or change it or make it match some idea or image in the mind. So whatever you find within, whether it's shame or discomfort or fear, spirituality's invitation is for you to turn toward it, to infuse your present moment experience with a curious, loving, and warm awareness, to not resist it or wish it away or wish it were something else, but to accept it. And if when you look within, you find resistance or non-acceptance, to welcome that too. To not make that wrong either, to allow the not allowing, to accept the lack of acceptance. And then this allows you to access a much deeper kind of peace. It's a peace in which even moments of difficulty and of discomfort, moments of resistance and non-acceptance are held in the loving arms of awareness. It's drenching your present experience, whatever it is, with unconditional love, with the welcoming, and with curiosity. Because that's what I'm calling spirituality, the understanding that everything that is happening within you is spiritual. Even the shame, the ugly thought, the discomfort. And then paradoxically, when you welcome and bless, allow, accept it all, that's when the real possibility of being truly at peace arises. Not a peace that's the opposite of conflict or struggle, but a peace that's bigger than that. It's a peace that can hold the conflict and hold the discomfort, a peace that can hold the struggle. And this is a peace that's bigger than the mind can conceptualize or understand. It's bigger than any idea or notion that the mind can come up with. So that's the perspective I'm inviting you to take today as we talk, and after today, as you continue to do this work. And now when it comes to responding to racism, I'm very much inspired by Gandhi. And this brings us to the social change that we're here to talk about today. The social change that has been and continues to be so urgently needed. But before we do that, I want to point out that this urgency isn't anything new. It's not something that started 12 months ago, right? After May 25th, 2020, the day that the world collectively witnessed the brutal murder of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police, many more have we awakened to this reality, to this urgency, but it's not anything new. So before we go into what responding to racism looks like, before we go into what it looks like to be non-cooperative today, let's talk about what I mean when I say racism and white supremacy. So when many white people hear the words racism and white supremacy, their minds go to conscious hate, to neo-Nazis, to the Klan, white supremacists. But that's different. White supremacy is more than just white supremacists. White supremacy is more than just prejudice. White supremacy is a structure of social and institutional violence. It's a structure that harms and oppresses people of color by devaluing their needs, desires, and their lives, valuing them less than those of white people. White supremacists are just one response to that system. It's a response that basically says, we need to bolster this system of white supremacy that's already here. But another and much more common response to the system of white supremacy, and the response that I want to challenge today, is to perhaps view white supremacists with disdain or disgust while doing nothing about the system itself, right? To say, I'm not like them, and to, in fact, not act like them, right? And then to think that that's enough. Or to use the fact that we are one, which is absolutely true, but to use that fact to overlook the realities of our day-to-day experience in a society that doesn't view all of us as one. Or to only meditate or pray or send thoughts and condolences and think that that's enough. But those aren't enough. What's needed is non-cooperation. So what's needed is for you to actively swim against the current. And I'd like to say a little bit more about this idea of swimming against the current. So to swim against the relentless and systemic current of white supremacy, because if you're not actively swimming against the current, then you're going along with it. In other words, only when you're actively working toward dismantling white supremacy are you not upholding it. Those are the only two available options. So let's talk a little bit more about how we got here. And I'm going to focus for a moment a little specifically on the United States. So white supremacy was intentionally baked into this society, from the enslavement and genocide of indigenous peoples here, to the enslavement of African people, to wars created solely to seize the land and territories already occupied by people of color, to immigration policies that have disproportionately harmed Latino and Asian immigrants. That is this country's history. And these are sometimes referred to as shameful chapters of US history. But the fact is, they aren't chapters of this country's history. They're the foundation of this country itself. They're the foundation upon which the legal system, financial institutions, medical systems, the military, schools, all institutions within the society were built. And the impact of that is still felt by all of us every day. And oftentimes for white people, this impact comes in the form of being essentially walled off from the experiences of racism that your brothers and sisters who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color navigate and face every day. They all have their stories. We all have our stories. I have my own stories. And I'll share one of my stories with you. So not too long ago, I was confronted by a white man who I'd never seen before. And this man just happened to be passing through my predominantly white neighborhood where I've now lived for about 7 years. And he stopped me while I was enjoying the garden that I had planted in my front yard. And he demanded to know what I was doing there. And again, the problem isn't this one man, it's the system that shaped his thinking in such a way that I genuinely believe he thought he was doing a good thing, a helpful thing, a noble thing by coming up to me in a neighborhood he clearly didn't know and questioning my right to be there. And when I say that this man and that every person who isn't actively dismantling white supremacy is actually upholding it, I'm absolutely not talking about your character or your intention. What I'm really pointing to is your socialization, the way you were taught, consciously, unconsciously, intentionally, unintentionally, through culture, society, education, every institution in the society that you've ever come into contact with, the way you were taught to view the world and the people in it. Because what white supremacy truly needs to continue to exist, to thrive, isn't necessarily Klan members or neo-Nazis or other human beings full of hate and rage. What it needs is people going with the flow of the system, going with the flow that the system put in place. And this is why I say, if you're not actively working toward dismantling white supremacy, you're playing a role in upholding it. And I want you to really let that in. If you're not actively working toward dismantling white supremacy, you're playing a role in upholding it. And let in all the feelings that come from hearing that too. Notice any discomfort or shame, maybe any disbelieving defensiveness, any indignation or desire to say, no, you're wrong, or not me. Notice whatever it is. Noticing and examining this discomfort is essential if you want to begin dismantling white supremacy. Because if this discomfort goes unquestioned or unexamined, it helps to keep white supremacy in place. And here's how. If you're feeling that discomfort, but don't question or examine it, you'll likely find yourself engaging in unconscious, automatic, habitual, or disconnected action. Actions like insisting that you were taught to treat everyone the same, that you're colorblind. You might cry or point out that you have friends or family members who are people of color, that you have a long history of civil rights activism. Or you might raise what you believe to be a more salient issue like class or gender, or the problem you have with the words or actions of protesters. But any compulsive reaction that's not accompanied by an intentional response to actively dismantling white supremacy helps to keep white supremacy in place. So if you're reacting from a place of discomfort without responding to what Black, Indigenous, people of color all over the country, all over the world are saying and have been saying for generations, then you're continuing to play a role in upholding white supremacy. So this is why your yoga practice, if you have a yoga practice or whatever practice of presence you have, is so important. This is why using spirituality as a tool of awareness, of presence, rather than as a way to chase peace, is so important. So instead of chasing peace, a peace you can probably find easily if you focus on denying or ignoring or soothing your discomfort. Instead of chasing that peace, the invitation is to turn toward the discomfort, to welcome it, to allow it, to really look at it. Because that awareness of it helps to diminish its power. And then that allows you to look more closely, more nakedly, more honestly at your own thoughts and behaviors, to examine them, to question them. Not for the purpose of beating yourself up or getting lost in guilt or shame or self-pity or defensiveness, because all of that is just another distraction. But for the purpose of then doing the work to begin dismantling racism from the inside out. And then taking the next step of taking wise action to begin dismantling systemic racism. To begin acting in non-cooperation with systemic racism. And so it's with this understanding of spirituality and of racism that I offer you 5 ways, the 5 following ways that you as spiritual practitioners can take that wise action. Ways you can respond to racism and work toward dismantling white supremacy here and now, and in each given moment. So the first one is to look within. Notice your internal reaction when your ideas about racism are challenged, particularly when you feel like you're being implicated in white supremacy. Notice any impulse to explain or defend without judging it, without acting on it. Increase your internal capacity to hold that discomfort. And if you can think back on a time when you did something racist, when you were called a racist, or when you treated a Black, Indigenous person of color with less kindness or respect than you would have treated them if they'd been white, take steps to repair the harm that was caused. The best time to repair any damage you've done is as soon as it happens. But the second best time is now. 2, educate yourself. Buy books about racism and anti-racism and read them, discuss them, do the exercises. Follow organizers working for structural change on social media. And then when they say something you doubt or you don't understand, research it. Avoid asking Black, Indigenous people of color to explain the history and implications of race and racism and do that for you unless that's their job or they're offering themselves up for that. 3, practice non-cooperation with the system of white supremacy, not necessarily white supremacists. Yes, it's absolutely important to call out racism when you see it and to learn how to do it in skillful, effective, and powerful ways. But don't spend your energy and resources trying to convince people who refuse to see the harm that white supremacy does to people of all races. Instead, work toward dismantling the system of white supremacy. Focus your energy on your political representatives, schools, healthcare programs, your workplace, organizations that are already working for structural change. Work in systems. 4, if you're white, put your white privilege to work. You have access, resources, and opportunities that Black, Indigenous people of color simply don't have. Use them wisely. Use them in ways that break away from systems of power that oppress and in ways that support structural change. Quite some time ago, probably about 11 months ago or a year ago, I saw on the news a clip of a Black man. And this was in the height of the Black Lives Matter protests. And this Black man was halfway between a crowd of protesters and a line of armed police, this single man standing there alone, down on one knee with his head bowed, silent. And it was very tense. You could feel the tension in that moment. And a young white man came out from the back of the crowd with his hands up in the air, and he stood his body between the Black man and this line of armed police officers. And when asked later by the press whether he was scared, he said, "No, I wasn't scared because of the color of my skin." And that, I thought, was a powerful example of what using white privilege can look like on the physical level. And when you're ready to take action, when you're ready to use your own white privilege, don't hesitate to get the guidance of Black, Indigenous people of color who are organizers and activists and who have already been doing this work for years. And if you do get their help, be sure you compensate them for their time and their expertise and their effort. And finally, as you start doing the work to dismantle systemic racism, you may feel nervous or hesitant to move forward. You might be scared that you'll say or do something wrong, or that you'll make some sort of mistake. And I'm here to tell you, you will. You will. So 5 is don't let mistakes, not even big mistakes, stop you. You will absolutely make mistakes. People will tell you you're causing harm. People will ask you to stop doing what you're doing or to do what you're doing differently. And all of that is part of the learning journey. And when that happens, hold yourself with compassion and listen. Listen, learn, repair the damage caused, adjust your behavior, then keep going. In this work, there is no freedom from mistakes. Mistakes will happen. Discomfort will happen. Use your spiritual practice to manage the discomfort that would otherwise keep you in reaction rather than responding. Use your spiritual practice to manage the fear of making mistakes. Use your spiritual practice to manage the pain and discomfort that comes when you make a mistake and when you get criticized. Don't let that stop or slow you from continuing to take action, and then keep going. Keep taking action. Keep swimming against the current. Thank you so much, my friends. And if there are any questions, anyone has any questions or anything they'd like to drop into the chat, please feel free. I'd love to hear from you. All right, friends, seeing nothing at this time, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today for Responding to Racism, a Spiritual Perspective here on the Give Back Yoga University platform. You can learn more about my work and how to work with me at attunedliving.com. And you can learn about my upcoming 100% scholarship-based BIPOC 200-hour teacher training at bipocyogateachers.org. That's BIPOCYOGATEACHERS.org. where you can enroll in the training if you're a Black, Indigenous person of color, or you can donate to support the creation of this training to help us create a more inclusive yoga community and to encourage a diverse range of teaching voices. Again, that's bipocyogateachers.org to learn more. And you can find more Give Back Yoga University talks, classes, and workshops at gby.university/schedule. And remember, all the funds raised through Give Back Yoga University support nonprofit yoga projects in prisons and hospitals and community care centers. So your money is absolutely going toward a great cause. So thank you so much, my friends. And oh, and I do see a question. I'll jump in and answer this question. What is your point of view on actions that can appear as tokenism? I so appreciate that. And what I've really found is that tokenism arises most frequently when folks understand this idea that diversity is important, but they don't understand the reason why. They don't go deeper than just this kind of mental notion that diversity, they have told me diversity is important, right? And so it's so important. So my point of view on actions that can appear as tokenism is that, you know, the person that is engaged in the tokenism needs to do a little bit more work, right? Certainly they understand that people are telling them diversity is important and they're listening, but what's important here is not diversity for diversity's sake, but why? Why is it important? Why is it important for us to have diverse voices? Why is that important? What does that mean for you and the organization you serve? What does that mean for the communities you live in and society at large, right? These are the questions that people need to begin asking themselves. And so with that comes that deep inquiry of looking within, and also that continuing educating of themselves and working with people who are doing this work to find their own areas that they're maybe lacking in knowledge and information and wisdom. So tokenism, okay, you heard the message, diversity is important, but now the larger question is why? And in the context of not just, you know, this organization to get the A+ on the report card from diversity organizations, but the larger context of why this society requires that and needs that. So I hope that answers your question, Lucy. Thanks so much for asking. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. So appreciate all of you and Give Back Yoga University for this opportunity. All right, thanks, friends.